Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 15 of the Argument Clinic. I'm proud that we've lasted 15 episodes, and hopefully we will last many, many more. There will be many, many moons full of the Argument Clinic podcast. Now, my name is Martin, and I am here with my lovely co-host, whose name begins with an L and ends with...
Lawrence. Yes, that's my name.
Yes, Lawrence. And together, we're the Argument Clinic podcast, a podcast about all things Lincoln Douglas debate. We focus on fundamentals here on the podcast, and what we want you to do is we want to give you a chance to improve your game, no matter what skill level you are, whether you're a sizzling veteran of the tournament scene, of the tournament scene, or someone going to their brand spanking new tournament, or whether you're coaching Lincoln Douglas debate and you're looking to pick up some tips from some guys from some parts of the country that exist. Well, this is the podcast for you. So Lawrence, over the past 2 weeks, I've been at 2 debate tournaments, and I actually my students have taken down 2 championships. Not to brag, actually completely to brag. One of my students won the JV division at Yale, and the other, a different student, won the varsity division at the West Des Moines Valley tournament. And both of those are really good. But I'm also incredibly tired as a result and haven't slept for a while. Now, I know you were at Valley because I saw you and we broed out, although we failed to take a picture for the podcast, which was obviously an error. But Lawrence, how were your past 2 weekends? I think you were at 2 debate tournaments too?
Yeah, so I was at Green Hill, where I had the opportunity to squirrel on the final panel, on the final round panel, and then I was at Valley with you.
Excellent. Valley was a good time. I've been to the Green Hill tournament a number of times, and it really is just a great tournament. But our kids wanted to go to Yale, so that's where we end up. Okay, so that's what we've been doing for the past 2 weeks. Shout out to Ryan Kim, one who was actually my mentee at one of my mentees at Victory Briefs. He was in it to win it at JV Yale. I don't think he broke. I also saw Matthew Liu and Kalina Pieriga, I think. Maybe I'm mispronouncing her last name, but both I saw almost all of my mentees at all of the tournaments. Shout out to you all. You all did great. Okay, so our podcast is sponsored by Victory Briefs, which is an excellent debate camp that prepared a number of students for an excellent amount of success over their past weekends. Victory Briefs has some of the best instruction in the entire nation, and if you're looking for a place to spend your summer and improve at all of the things that we're talking about on this podcast, then a concentrated 2-week period of debate camp at a place like Victory Briefs can really help. They also have a Facebook page and a debate news site, although I gather those are mostly dormant now. Lawrence, if you had to choose between Victory Briefs, and Victory Briefs, which camp would you choose?
I'd go with Victory Briefs.
See, that actually was not one of the 3 options, so I'll penalize you, but I take your meaning. Okay, so today we are by ourselves doing a podcast on Persuasion. And before, this is a choreography episode, which is an episode that focuses on mechanics. So I wanted to read a letter that we actually got during the middle of the summer from one of our listeners. I'll read it out loud. This was the inspiration for this episode and the reason that we're doing it. It's from Marcus. So here's what Marcus says. Marcus says, "My name is Marcus, and I'm a speech and debate coach here in Cheyenne, Wyoming." Is that right?
I'm pretty sure it's Cheyenne, but it's also Wyoming, so I don't really know.
So Shy and not Shay.
I don't know.
Cheyenne.
Let's get.
I think you're right, Cheyenne. If we mispronounce it horribly, Marcus, feel free to send us an email at theargumentclinicpodcast@gmail.com. He says, "Well, I coach all events. My first level is Lincoln Douglas. Good choice. My LD crew has been listening to your podcast for a few months now. Shout out to the crew. And we have been really enjoying and learning a lot. As a philosophy guy, I appreciate the way you make ideas and theories accessible to high schoolers. Thank you. I'm writing you because we'd like to request an episode if you're interested. We're so interested. On a few occasions, you have referenced things like confidence and delivery, and more specifically, quote, perceptual dominance, end quote, on the judge adaptation episode, one of our best. From my perspective as a coach, I think our crew's biggest strength is arguments, but I think we would really like to focus more on judge perception and strong presentation. Good of you to recognize that. We are dying to hear more about perceptual dominance, including maybe more about how it changes for different genders, what exercises or used drills to hone it, or really anything else you'd like to share that hasn't been already presented. I meant to meet you guys in Birmingham, but I was stuck in policy building most of the time. Ironically, I think one of my LDers visited your table. Anyway, thanks for time and thanks for all the podcasts. Stay frosty. See, our policy here on the Argument Clinic podcast is that if you sign your email with "Stay Frosty," it pretty much doesn't matter what you say. We're going to give in to your demands. So, so as a consequence of that, thank you very much, Marcus and his squad for sending us this request, and we are happy to talk about perceptual dominance. We have already, as Marcus mentioned, talked about a bunch of this stuff on the judge adaptation episode. So if you're at all, if you all would like to go back and listen to it, if you haven't already, it would be a good time as an accompaniment to this episode to go back and listen to that. But what we're going to do in this episode is go over some of the things that he requested that we talk about in both in terms of, what's perceptual dominance, how does that change for different genders, and what drills can you use to hone your persuasive ability. Lawrence and myself have put together a bunch of content, me with myself focusing on the drills and Lawrence focusing on more like perceptual dominance, what is it sort of thing. And in this episode, which is probably going to be shorter than normal, we're going to talk about how to improve those concepts and your skills. Lawrence, anything to add before we jump into the first topic?
No, I think that's it. I'm just kind of happy that we got a viewer requested episode, so I'm hoping we do this one justice.
Excellent. Now, even though I said jump in, we're going to go to a quick break and then we'll come back. Okay, so this episode, we're going to have two main sections before our mini debate, the only part of our podcast that matters at the end. In the first bit, we're going to review persuasion and what it is, and Lawrence is going to go into some of the specific things that Marcus asked that we talk about, as well as some additional ways to understand persuasion. It's easy to talk about persuasion in a very general sense without getting into a lot of specific things, and we are going to get into some of the real specific things associated with persuasion. So first things first, and then after this section, we're going to talk about drills that you would do in order to improve your persuasive ability. So what is persuasion? So number one, you should check out our judge adaptation episode, of course. We're going to fill in some stuff that we didn't catch, and Lawrence has done a lot of academic research into this question and has come up with a bunch of answers. But first, by way of review, for those of you that didn't listen to the judge adaptation episode, a quick refresher course. For those of you that did, this will be a little bit of repetition. So we explained persuasion there according to three related concepts, and I believe that those come from Aristotle. Persuasion, in general, is convincing someone that something is correct, or that what you are saying is something that someone else should believe. In general, that's what it is. And logos, pathos, and ethos, the three parts of persuasion, are three ways of influencing people. The first one is logos. People are influenced by logic. If you convince someone that something you're saying is logical, they're obviously far more likely to believe you. The second one is pathos. Pathos is emotional appeal. If you pull at the heartstrings of someone, or you get their emotions to reflect what you're talking about, then they're more likely to be emotionally and mentally in tune with what you're saying. And then ethos, or empathy, or having having a connection with the person that you're talking to. That's also a way. It promotes shared understanding between people. If someone feels like you and them are the same, that you're on the same wavelength, that you both are the same kind of person and understand each other, they're far more likely to accept the things that you will say. So we divided them into three sort of different things, and we talked about how you can, tug at the heartstrings of the judge, how can you give the appearance of logic and organization, and how you can extract empathy from people. So that's what we talked about on the judge adaptation episode, but Lawrence is ready to take us to the next level. So Lawrence, you have a different thing here. What is persuasion according to Lawrence now?
Well, actually, quickly before we get into that, I also talk relatively in depth about Logos, Pathos, and Ethos in one of the recorded modules that Victory Briefs put online, which is on their YouTube channel. I think it's like Debating Traditionally Part 1 or something like that. And I talk about Logos, Pathos, and Ethos for like 25 minutes in that segment. So if you also want sort of a refresher, that might also be a place to go. Anyways, so the question is sort of what is persuasion? And it's hard to say, and like if you sort of Google what is persuasion, you'll come up with a bunch of different answers, and a bunch of different sources will say a bunch of different things. And even here in the notes, I have like 4 different definitions or subpoints of what persuasion is. But basically, it's a communication process where the communicator tries to elicit a particular and desired response from the receiver, and by transmitting some sort of message to them. And there's like a bunch of different.
What kind of responses are you talking about here? I assume you're about to get into that.
Yeah. So in sort of a non-debate sense, think about like watching a TED Talk, which by the way, which will become like really relevant in the later sections when we talk about sort of like what makes someone persuasive. But like when you watch a TED Talk in a non-debate context, what is the sort of persuasion that occurs there? Well, I'd assume it's sort of like them trying to change your mind, to change the way that you think about the world. So like see something new, to see the world from their way. Like, I mean, have you seen like a good TED Talk recently?
Me, no, although I've seen a lot of very fun Onion parodies of TED Talks, like The Biggest Rock.
Okay, well,
which, by the way, for all the listeners involved, is a TED Talk of this woman scrolling through a PowerPoint of increasingly bigger rocks.
That sounds fascinating. Can you send me can you send me the link to that afterwards? Anyway,
yeah, I will.
Okay, so if you haven't heard of TED Talk, I haven't seen one super recently, but I think the last one that I watched was sort of about non-competitive or versus competitive game theory. And it's like a short 10-minute video where part of it is an outline of the sort of prisoner's dilemma and explaining like how to effectively play game theory and distinguishing between non-competitive games, which is where you sort of want to cooperate to maximize the benefits for everyone, versus competitive games, which is not like, competitive CSGO gaming or like Dungeon and Dragons gaming or Magic the Gathering gaming, but instead like games where you are attempting to secure the best outcome for yourself. And basically, the point of this was to convince you or to persuade you to see the world from his point of view, the speaker's point of view, where he's like, a lot of people are bad at playing games. The more that you understand the difference between non-competitive versus competitive games, the better you can sort of have, a better, like the more likely you'll have a better society or a better life. And he was trying to persuade you. He was utilizing communication process, in this case, a sort of giant stage and a medium through which he spoke out to everyone using a microphone and words and et cetera. Mm-hmm. And an attempt to elicit a particular response from the receiver, which was the audience and everyone observing, which is to change their minds. And he was persuasive because he did that.
Come to think of it, the last TED Talk that I saw that was like a real one was earlier in the summer. I forget who it was about, but it was about averages. And the basic idea is sometimes when you design for the average, you are designing for no one, because there is no one who is actually the average in a lot of cases. They talked about airplane pilots actually in the Air Force, and they were having a lot of like crashes kind of related to the size of the cockpit. And that was because they had designed the cockpit for the average pilot, where they had like taken everyone's statistics and averaged them. But turns out there was no one who actually fit. Because it was designed for the average pilot, but no one was the average pilot. So that led to the Air Force developing adjustable seats, which, by the way, was not only, and I think they like won the Nobel Prize for it or something, maybe not the Nobel Prize, but some prize. And that, it turns out, was, did you know this, Lawrence? That was actually the cause of adjustable seats in cars.
I did not know this.
Was the Air Force. And the overall argument that they were making was actually kind of for education, which is that you should not teach to the average student because the average student doesn't exist. Instead, you should kind of have differentiated teaching. It was very interesting.
Yeah, actually, or like minimally the mean, because the mean makes a lot more sense than the average, because like the average person is less than 2 arms. So like it doesn't really make sense to use the average in a lot of these instances. So yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, because there's people without arms. So anyways, sort of off the
persuasion.
Yes. Okay. So that's sort of like what persuasion is: a communication process in which the communicator attempts to elicit a particular and desired response from their receiver using like using like messages and symbols, et cetera, et cetera. Well, so what are sort of the components of persuasion? And I'll go through them really quick here and just sort of talk about these 4 components of persuasion and and like what they are and what they do. So the first part of persuasion is that persuasion is symbolic, in that it relies on sort of symbols to convince people. And well, like in sort of in a general academic sense, like people talk about persuasion in sort of the real world, like business meetings and stuff, or like convincing mass populations. But we're in a high school LD debate, so like don't really have to worry about that. And so like in the real world, you would use symbols like a flag or logos or something to sort of persuade people, because you use these sort of messages that people sort of understand because they have lots of meaning behind them. But in debate, we do the same thing. We utilize persuasion by utilizing certain symbols that we all sort of agree are part of our shared vocabulary and our shared sort of debate culture.
Is that kind of like metaphors?
Well, not
like you would like, I mean, like, because it kind of sounds like that's what you're saying, right? Like, because it's helpful to help people construct images in their mind of stuff, and similes and metaphors often, by drawing comparisons to things, kind of do that.
I mean, perhaps I'm more thinking about sort of words that sort of appeal to our shared vocabulary, sort of words like justice, morality, in the sort of value sense, or maybe like value criterion and contention. And because if you don't sort of appeal using these sort of symbols that we all share, that's very difficult to persuade people, because you sort of have to get on a common page with them and use the symbols that we all sort of attach deep meaning to convey deeper messages and to connect with people on a sort of different level. And so I think that part of persuasion we all sort of get, because we are all in debate and we all use the same arguments and we all like say the same things, basically, right? All say the words like value criterion, contention, warrant, etc. So that's not really that difficult. But I think that the next part about sort of influence, which is the second main component of persuasion, is the part
symbolic to influence.
Yeah. So influence is sort of what the second main component of what persuasion is. And so like something we got to be aware of is that persuasion doesn't like automatically work. You can't persuade someone generally immediately. Instead of trying to sort of coerce people into immediately agreeing with you, you're not really attempting to like get people to flip everything about themselves. What you're instead trying to do is take certain parts of people and influence just those little certain parts. So like when you're trying to convince a debate judge, it's not worth trying to get them to abandon everything that they believe in. Instead, it's about strategically influencing certain parts and influencing certain parts of that target, certain parts of their attitudes, and certain parts of their behavior. And so I think a lot of people, when they're concerned with persuasion, are trying too hard to get to something that really doesn't need to exist. Really, we're only trying to persuade just a little part of the judge, just a little part of what they believe in. One small belief.
So what is the distinction in practice between trying to influence one part of a judge and all of them?
So I think like a good example is sort of political leanings that people have. So without sort of us getting into an in-depth conversation about what politics are and like our personal beliefs, which we will not, a lot of people will try really hard to change like basically the core political beliefs of people in these debates. Like they just automatically start from the assumption like that person is of a different political party than me, and will attempt to persuade too much of them. And that really doesn't really work, because you can't really get people to upend all of their beliefs. But instead, when you think about persuasion as influence, where you, instead of trying to like change everything about them, where you just influence a little part of them, a little bit at a time, that makes it a lot more likely to sort of change people's minds and convince them. You don't convince someone to like abandon their entire political beliefs in like 1 second. Instead, it's like a process over, courses of years or months at least, where people change their beliefs. And I think people need to recognize that in debate rounds. You're not going to get people to overthrow all of their beliefs, but instead, when you're concerned about persuasion, you have to influence just parts of them.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Part 3 is people persuade themselves, or it's the persuading self component of persuasion. So I think one of the biggest myths of what persuasion is that you're attempting to convince people to do things that they don't really want to do. And like in debate, I think it's pretty obvious, where people are like, I know you don't want to vote affirmative, but you have to. And I think that's kind of a silly way of thinking about persuasion, because really you're not attempting to get them to do something that they don't want to do. Instead, what we're trying to do is persuade them to just change a few attitudes or behaviors. And people really only persuade themselves from within. You're sort of providing the external motivation for them to change. You provide arguments, right? You set up the sort of reasons for that they would change, but you're not sort of like forcing them to change. You're only activating their already inner desire to change.
I promise you, you cannot force somebody to change their mind about something.
Right.
It's
And I think that's what people in debate are sometimes trying to do. They're trying to force people to change their minds. But really, what you should be attempting to do is to just change a little bit of them, right? And this is sort of the above point. But like, people have to change themselves from within. You can't really truly force anyone to do something that they don't want to do. And so if you approach debate as something like, I know you don't want to vote affirmative because I know you disagree with this, but you're still going to have to. It's not a very effective way of persuasion. I mean, like, it could be, I guess. I mean, what do you think?
There's no way it works.
Yeah. So
I mean, what you have to do is use some of the other things like the influence and the symbolic self, use the symbolic and the influence components to get people to kind of want to go your way anyway. And if they want to vote for your side of the resolution, they will. And if they won't, they won't. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. So it's not like we're not trying to like form attitudes in people, really. We're not trying to like implant really new ideas necessarily, but we are trying to induce people to alter slight beliefs that they already possess. And we just give them that little nudge in that direction, right? When someone convinces you to buy something, like they're a good salesman, they really aren't necessarily implanting a full new idea in your head. What they are doing is they're latching onto an idea that already exists and sort of nudging you in the correct direction. Right? Like if you, get presented with your typical, door-to-door vacuum salesman, if those are still a thing, I don't think they are. Maybe you think they're really good at persuasion because you didn't think you needed a vacuum cleaner at first, and now they sold you on it. But really, that's not what they're doing. What they're doing is they're latching onto something about you, right? Like maybe you just really like new stuff and they're sort of just nudging you in that direction. Or maybe you really like cleanliness and they're just nudging you in that direction. They're not really putting a new idea in your head. They're just taking something that's already there and pushing you. And so I think that's really important for persuasion is you are not trying to change that person in their entirety. You are instead trying to latch onto something that is already there and just nudge it in that direction.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think the fourth and final component is just that persuasion involves the transmission of a message, which is sort of obvious. I don't really think we need to really go into anything, but like you have to have a message that you're attempting to convey to someone. Otherwise, you're not really persuading them.
And I think the way that this one most often comes out is at the end of the debate, you need kind of a central unifying theme for what you're presenting to the judge. When you're trying to debate in front of someone, you aren't trying to just give them like a collection of four things and four different themes. And you're saying, well, at the end of the debate, I hope you decide which of these is most important. I hope you pick one. No, when you're debating against someone and in front of a certain judge, it's important to have a central unifying message that, of course, does all the other things. Like it appeals to the judge personally, doesn't try to change their mind about everything, but does about some things and appeals to some sort of shared concepts. But what's important is that there kind of be one central thing that they get away from it. Otherwise, you will simply distract them.
Yeah, that's actually sort of the main idea of the message is you need something to persuade them. And I guess we sort of talked about this already in our judge adaptation episode, which is like, if you don't have a clear message, it's very difficult to vote for you, as Martin just sort of said. And that's the important thing to keep in mind with persuasion. When you think about someone who is persuasive, it's because they have sort of a single, simple idea that they're sort of pushing you on. And it's very easy for you to latch onto. It's why like logos or catchphrases or things like that are really effective because it helps sell the sort of single message that's really important to persuasion. No one's persuasive if they just have a bunch of unrelated, like very jumbled together thoughts that they sort of throw at you. They're persuasive because they have a single simple idea. And I like mentioned the TED Talks earlier, but think about those TED Talks, right? The reason they're so persuasive is because like they might be throwing a lot of information at you, but it's really not that difficult at the end of the long TED Talk to walk away with like a very simple message that you got and understood and you were persuaded by.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I think I included this like list of 6 things here, and I'm going to walk through these in like a minute or two. But basically, I'm just going to list these and we'll move on to the next part. These are the sort of 6 components. Well, we just covered the 4 components of persuasion, but these are sort of 6 things that are psychologically important to understand for when it comes to the sort of psychology of motivation, or not psychology of motivation, psychology of persuasion. And these 6 things are: first is reciprocity, that people are persuasive people if they sort of are reciprocal with you. And it's a little bit difficult to do that in a sort of a debate round, since obviously it's not super reciprocal with the judge. But think of it in sort of real life. Like, no one's really persuasive if all they're doing is sort of pushing you to do things and they don't really do anything in return. You have to sort of offer up something. The second thing is sort of scarcity, which is people are persuasive and things are persuasive if there are sort of less of valuable things. If something is everywhere, it's not super important that you have it. But because there's sort of less of it, you can sell it. And in debate, this does make sense because there's not that many good debaters and there's not many sort of good ideas, good arguments. And so if you are sort of selling something that is scarce, i.e. a good debate, then that's persuasive. The next part is authority, and which is people who have a lot of authority are persuasive, sort of obviously. The next part, number 4, is consistency, which is that consistent messages are persuasive, because if you sort of flip-flop a lot back and forth, you're not really perceived as credible. The 5th part is sort of just general likability, because the more likable you are, the more likely you are to persuade someone. And the final part is just consensus, which is that the more people that agree with you, the more safe it is to agree with you. And so if you're sort of selling a position that is like well established within the research and a lot of people have agreement on, then it's much more likely to be persuasive because people sort of like falling in with something that's everyone else agrees with.
When we if you all have any questions about any of those specific things, all of them sounded interesting, but it's really important to us that we get to some of the drill components of what we want to talk with you about. So if you have a desire to talk about any of those items, you should just feel free to message us and we'll include it in a future episode.
Or just respond to your email. There's a lot of stuff. Like, there's an entire, like, a lot of this is like sort of built from my communication class, which is like a whole semester long. So obviously you can't really talk about everything.
Yeah, I hope not. So let's talk about perceptual dominance. Perceptual dominance, this is the next big section. Perceptual dominance is debate specific. All of that other stuff we were telling you, that is persuasion writ large. How does it work? This is perceptual dominance. And a lot of times people use perceptual dominance as a synonym, as equivalent to persuasion. They're saying like persuasion and perceptual dominance, same thing. They're not exactly the same thing. Perceptual dominance is kind of the appearance of persuasion. What does it look like to be persuasive if you forget all of the things that someone is saying? How, if you watched a debate and you just heard kind of the tone of their voice, you just heard their voice, you saw how they were moving, you saw how the other debater was reacting, you saw how they were standing, but you couldn't actually process any of the information you were giving. Perceptual dominance is looking good according to all of those factors.
Yeah, so like the first part was sort of what is the content of our message, and this is the presentation of our message, right?
Yes, sure. And so there are 2 main components of this. The first is voice. So how do you use your voice, Lawrence, to display perceptual dominance?
So I don't like think I'm perceptually dominant anymore. It's sort of a practiced thing to have, and so I'm pretty sure after NSDA Nationals was over, it's just gone. But I'd say there's a few obvious things.
The beats.
Yeah, whoopsies. So I'd say the few things that like we all sort of agree are necessary for a voice to sort of carry perceptual dominance, independent of the content of what the voice is saying, is first that you really have to project, because it's not really perceptually dominant if no one can hear what you're saying, or you sound timid and you don't really have like the sort of projection that you need. The second part I would say is sort of just general loudness. I think this is kind of related to projecting, but projecting is more about like reading the room and figuring out how loud, or like about how much you need to, or how loud you need to speak. And loudness is just sort of a general, like you need to be heard by people. Third is not speaking too fast. And occasionally there are moments where speaking fast might actually increase your perceptual dominance, because there are some debaters that do speak fast. But by and large, speaking slow is the hallmark of a good persuasive speaker. Like when you watch those really fancy or like really memorable historical speeches, no one's talking that fast, right? And they're all really slow because they allows them to sort of emphasize the words that they want to talk about, and it allows them to sort of make sure that everyone is understanding everything that they're saying. And fourth, I would say that the voice should have good vocal inflection, which is that if there is just entirely monotone, where all you do is talk like this, it's not really that exciting. So you sort of have to have like some energy. You have to inject some enthusiasm into your voice. And I guess the fifth one is sort of just not stumbling, although like it's okay to throw in every so often. But like generally speaking, people who use a lot of filler words or stumble a lot are just not going to have good voices that contribute to perceptual dominance.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do basically what Lawrence just said, except I'm going to take some of those things, convert them into some easy to understand concepts, and sort of deliver it fluidly like we're talking about that you should do here. So I'm going to go bottom up from what Lawrence has said. Number one thing when you're trying to be persuasive and use your voice is fluency. Fluency is kind of not using filler words, not having obvious gaps in your speech, and connecting everything that you're saying such that it sounds holistic. Fluency is important because people want to understand the things that you're saying as coming from a unified whole. They want to understand, you never want to lose them. You don't want them at any point to try and be thinking about other things, to try and keep track of what you're saying as if it is just like some unnumbered list in their head. Instead, everything should flow into each other. It's important not to have breaks that are too long, and it's important that sentences and things be connected together. Inflection, as Lawrence has said, inflection is important because it creates emphasis. Now, emphasis, right?
Yeah.
I always try to emphasize emphasis. Emphasis is where you put priority on certain things that you say. You do that by slowing down on some words, like I just did, and you also do it by becoming louder or softer, or by changing the way that you speak, aka inflection. So changing your inflection is important. If you shouted everything that you said, first of all, your judges would no longer have working ears. But secondly, even though we're telling you to be loud, don't be loud all the time. What you have to do is create differences in how you speak, because the way that we detect interestingness and emphasis is by the difference between what you say and what you said, immediately previously. So the order of a sentence and the inflection you put to different parts of that sentence helps create contrast so that people can understand what you're saying. So it helps to create emphasis. Third, again, going backwards, is speed or rate of delivery or frequency or whatever you want to call it. It's speed. So many of you may not already realize this. Well, maybe all of you do at some point. But normal conversational speed between people is too fast for conveying a whole bunch of information simultaneously. I want to quickly mention something that Lauren said. Lauren said, sometimes speaking fast is persuasive. One thing that I do want to say about that is that even in the debates where people are speaking fast, I believe people underestimate the fact that speaking slower, even in those rounds, is still more persuasive a lot of the time.
I'm not even referring to sort of those rounds. I'm just like kind of referring to when I debated at like nationals, for instance, I spoke kind of fast as the negative. And that was just partially because like I lacked self-control, but also because like I had a lot of information I wanted to get out. So I was okay with speaking fast. The trick for me though, was like, I had to make sure that when I was speaking fast, it wasn't coming off as like, oh, this person is a bad speaker. It's more like I have a lot of things to say, and I'm choosing to speak fast deliberately because I have so much information I want to put out. But again, it's sort of risky because if you speak too fast, it sounds not good, and it's like off-putting to the judges, and you risk sort of losing a lot of your persuasive, capacity.
As a general heuristic, when in doubt, you should slow down, especially because so there's two ways in particular that you should practice slowing down when you're speaking. This is very important. And for those of you looking to teach speech or that already teach speech, this should be second nature to you. But here's two ways of understanding how you should speak slower. The first is inside of words. stretch out the words. If a word is especially important, then slow down inside of the word. That can help you create emphasis, but also it gives the judge time to think about the concept that you just said. It makes them think that it is important. Then the second place that you do is in between words. In between words. Sometimes when you're on a particularly important sentence, slowing down and emphasizing each one of the words can really help get through to your judge. You also should try and slow down in between sentences because it gives people time to think about what you just said, especially if you just dropped a bombshell on the judge or the opponent. So speed, rate of delivery. It is possible to go fast, but everyone starts out way too fast. You have to slow them down. Then you can maybe speed them up later, but general heuristic, slow down.
Yeah, agreed.
The fourth one is volume, or how loud you are. In general, loudness conveys dominance, both because you kind of fill up the room and because it's a good way of creating emphasis. Talking about how loud you're talking can put emphasis on specific things. I'm not saying that you should shout at people, although, by the way, this is a random, completely weird fact, and this is not science. This is just what I know, having worked with a few people that have had this problem in debate. I will just throw this out there, and it could be accurate or not. I'm just saying, when I as a debater, stuttered a lot for a very long time. And the best way that I overcame my stuttering, and I realized that for some people this won't work, but I'm saying if you've tried a bunch of stuff and your issue is maybe obviously not like a super medical issue, but it's just a problem that you've had with stuttering for a long time. The thing that honestly got me to stop stuttering was, first of all, slowing down a little bit, but also just being super loud. I have no idea why that works. But for me, it worked because it allowed me to, perhaps I didn't have the breath to stutter because I was saying a lot of stuff super, super loud. That's what worked for me, and I used it to overcome a very serious problem of mine. Again, not recommending that to anyone, but if you're interested in trying some things, I have found this also worked on another student that also had this problem that I worked with him at camp, and he improved on that. Shout out to John Hordines if you're listening. So yes, being loud is good, and then it's also important that you project. I believe this is a kind of sort of a component of being loud. I don't remember exactly how this is separate, but it's kind of important that you fill the room. Okay, so we've talked for a long time about voice, but voice really is like the most important thing for perceptual dominance. So to reiterate, fluency, inflection, speed, and volume. So all of those things are important that you moderate. When you want to do volume, try and get louder if you're in doubt. When in doubt, get slower. When in doubt, create more variance in your sentences. And when in doubt, be more fluent, obviously. Now, one thing that Marcus specifically mentioned in his email that we talk about is differences in gender. Now, I can personally say that I am obviously not an expert in this, although I have had a very large number of female debaters in my time, probably, I would say, more than average in Lincoln Douglas debate. There are some obvious gender biases. I am capable of talking about this, but I think first I'll hand it over to Lawrence. Lawrence, how would you say gender differences manifest themselves in perceptual dominance in debate?
So I don't know like too much because A's a point, obviously I'm not, I'm a male, and B's a point, like I probably have not coached as many female debaters as you have, but of the ones that I sort of coach in Oklahoma, I'd say that there's a few issues that sort of that they face and that we have to sort of work to overcome. And I think the first one is that if you are, if your voice is particularly high pitched, that sort of elicits a negative response from the judge. So I don't know. What do you sort of think is the way to get around it? Like, because I think there's sort of two approaches. Because it's like one, you sort of just deal with it and you just keep your voice the same, and just the judges will eventually change. Or you can sort of attempt to lower the pitch of your voice. Which one has sort of worked with you, if that's ever been a complaint levied against your students?
Voice pitch, funnily enough, has not been a complaint.
Interesting.
That we have had. In general, we find that talking slower and trying to tone downward at the end of sentences can help. So for us, it wasn't really as much of an issue in the tone of their voice, as long as we talked about inflection. So here's the way of controlling inflection. If you tone up at the end of all your sentences, as sometimes people do, especially people with high voices, this can be bad because it sounds like you're asking a question, and that can come across as annoying, and people sometimes don't want to hear that. So in general, this is the kind of complaint that you're way more likely to get than like your voice is high pitched. Instead, you're likely to get a complaint like that just it sounds vague, like is not sure of their self, end quote. And a lot of that is because they tone upward at the end of sentences. So generally what you want to do, and this is just creating emphasis. This is not you should change your voice. This is here's how you change your voice in the middle of sentences like you already do. Tone downward at the end of sentences. Toning downward at the end of sentences helps convey certainty, like you know what you're saying. And even if your voice isn't that deep, you can still tone downward, and that conveys confidence. So I think that was the issue that I had. So one thing just about gender differences, and I realized that it would be much better, and we will eventually have, and I mean, we've had obviously plenty of women on the podcast before, but we will definitely have a woman on at some point where we can ask very specific questions to about that, because obviously this is like sort of kind of, I don't want to say mansplaining, but like it's like sort of that. But
yeah, and for like some of my debaters, I mean, we just got away with it because they were just better than the people. So like, it wasn't like judges were going to vote them down for it, and they sort of just owned that sort of fact that that's what they sounded like, and they just pushed forward, and the judges couldn't really complain that much. So like, that's also sort of an option. Is just like make judges deal with it.
Yeah. So second really important gender issue that we get is related to personal appearance. These are not really super avoidable. Honestly, my advice would be, if you're at all, just like, there are some people that will just pay attention to what a woman is wearing far more than they'll pay attention to what a man is wearing, and they'll write that on the ballot, and that will be a key voting issue. There is not much that you can do about those people other than to kind of dress as a little more conservatively. I would err on that side. And this isn't me being like, it's your fault. It's just me being like, there's nothing we can do to stop that kind of sexism other than by talking to our judges and communities. Those of you who are coaches, one thing that I do at all of our local tournaments is I make sure to go up before the tournament starts and to say, by the way, as you all know, in debate, sometimes people do experience some sexism. So some of the things that I'm about to talk about here with Lawrence, I kind of sort of mentioned to them. And if you kind of let people know that maybe that's where their biases are, some of them will change their minds. Other of them will note, and you can't control them, and that stinks. But yeah, so that's what I'll have to say about personal appearance. The third thing that's especially important, and this is the comment that we get most of all, is related to aggressiveness. So we kind of teach perceptual dominance and aggressiveness as being synonyms a lot of the time. Being assertive, looking confident, is a proxy for looking like you're winning a debate. And looking confident oftentimes means being kind of, for lack of a better word, aggressive, in the sense of like, you don't let your opponent just talk over you in cross-examination all the time. In this respect, so this is true for both males and females, but for that it's good to be aggressive. The difference is females have some bias that affects them, in that sometimes judges, and by the way, both male and female judges will say things to female debaters like, you were too aggressive. You were, and a word that is a curse word that starts with a B. People will often say that. Sometimes even actual judges, not like during the debate, but like sometimes afterwards and stuff like that. They'll describe debaters who are aggressive as being that. And the key thing is, you should not stop trying to be aggressive. I would try not to be overly aggressive, but it's okay to cut people off in cross-examination. You should do that. Do not be intimidated by people.
Yeah, like don't be mean, but like also like don't like tone it down just because of some of these sexist judges.
Here's what I'll say about that. The real difference is that female debaters usually don't get second chances with respect to things like that. Male debaters will get more. So you should you will have to be more careful with trying to appear dominance. Now, dominance can come in a lot of forms, and oftentimes it depends on your judge. So being aggressive is not the same thing as being confident. You can be confident in a very professorial way, in a very I know more than you cross-exam. There is a cross-examination persona that I've seen people adopt, just called the professor, where if their opponent says something, they're still confident. They never admit that they're wrong, but instead of being, super loud and kind of aggressive, they just kind of calmly point out all of the ways in which the opponent is saying is wrong. And if you feel that like aggression is not a thing that you can do, then there are all sorts of cross-ex personas that can work. This is one of them that does not come off as negative to some of those judges. I'm not saying everyone does it. Everyone has different styles of persuasion, and their own influences. But it is especially important for women to try and find that out, because at some local tournaments, those things can certainly be problems. The party line on the Lake Highland team is that if you're woman or a man, but woman is in most of the time, if you get a ballot that is just talking about your personal appearance or saying that you were too aggressive and stuff like that, usually that is a problem with the judge, and we don't really care about that. But it can still be hurtful to get those kinds of comments. And perhaps if you are a judge at some of these local tournaments and maybe have not thought about these issues before yourself, just having those images in your mind in the forefront when you're watching male and women debate can do a long can go a long way in correcting some of these self-conscious biases. And I think that's pretty much all that we should say about this topic for now, until we get an actual woman on the podcast that can maybe lend her own personal perspectives. And I know we know many of them. Lawrence, do you have anything else to add?
Nope, I think that's about it.
I am extremely, absolutely, and completely unqualified to talk about this next thing, so I'm going to let you do it.
All right. So again, I'm not going to claim to sort of speak for everyone here, but I will sort of chart or explain some of the personal experiences I've had and some of the things that I've witnessed, mostly within the sort of local circuit, about sort of racial differences in perceptual dominance, both relating to sort of voice and sort of nonverbal behaviors. So first, let's talk about sort of the vocal behaviors. And I think the most obvious thing that differentiates different races from each other in the minds of the judge is sort of these accents that people have. And so, for example, I know some Asian people that have a slightly more pronounced Asian accent, or people who are Black who have sort of more I don't know, like inner city accents. I don't really know what the appropriate way to describe it, but there is sort of an accent difference here. And I've noticed that sort of does play some influence on the judge's decision, because they sort of are likely to perceive Asians who don't have an accent as more intelligent as Asians with an accent, or Black people without an accent as more intelligent as people Black people without an accent as more intelligent as people with the accent. And to this end, I don't really know what the solution is, but it is something to sort of be aware of, and especially if you are a judge and have this sort of mindset, like just try to recognize these biases and minimize them. But long story short is, unfortunately, I think you're going to kind of have to work to reduce those accents, or just ignore it and just debate how you would otherwise, and just own it and take confidence in it. And judges are going to ignore the sort of difference in accents if you are really intelligent and are well spoken and just are confident and project anyways. So either sort of change a little bit or just own it and don't care. And I think this works for sort of most people anyways. The second sort of major area of perceptual dominance that affects different races is sort of this perception of aggressiveness. And I think this happens a lot more for people that aren't like Asian or Latino, like people who are Black, and like they get perceived as more aggressive than the average debater. And I don't really, I'm not Black, so I don't really claim to have an expert opinion on this. And I think we should bring on someone in the future to sort of talk about this. But all I will say here is that it is important to be aware of this, both as a sort of debater and a judge or a coach, of this sort of perceived aggressiveness factor that judges will have in their mind.
Yeah, I'll defer to you on this and to the next person that we have on. Okay, so I want to talk about nonverbal communication. We have a lot here, and we're going to go through it quicker than normal. So I wanted to talk about nonverbal communication in a couple of senses, and we've already talked about this before. All that I'll say is standing still, using hand motions, and especially and most importantly, above everything, eye contact. For me, those are the important things for nonverbal communication. But those only are important insofar as they serve a broader purpose of persuasion, which I gather Lawrence has put together an understanding of what that is that we can go through relatively quickly.
We talked about like the presentation stuff in the judge adaptation episode, right?
Yes.
Okay, that was a while back. Holy crud. Okay, so the sort of nonverbal part about persuasion.
Well, let's try and specifically tie that into perceptual dominance.
Yeah, perceptual dominance. So, as we sort of mentioned on the earlier episode, is the sort of ultimate thing that you're trying to do is to persuade a judge, and part of that is to appear as if you are in charge of a room. And so everything about you needs to be sort of geared towards that. And the first and most obvious thing that you can do is just be confident. And this is difficult because I think a lot of us will list public speaking as one of the greatest fears that we have. Like, I know, for instance, that one of the reasons I joined debate was to sort of overcome my fear of public speaking, because I don't think I was particularly natural at it. And I think people just sort of list that by and large as their number one greatest fear. And like, there's a lot of articles you can read about how to improve your public speaking and stuff like that. But I'll just give a sort of few quick tips that will help you use your nonverbals to portray or perceptual dominance. So the first thing is sort of acting in control, and you need to project confidence and self-esteem. And so like, if you all like know the sort of general ideas, like you only have one chance to make a good first impression, then you sort of need to live up to that. Judges most of the time, especially for the type of parent judges that you are more likely to be, using these persuasion techniques on, you're only going to see them like once or twice. And this is a good reason to sort of, be confident, project it, like direct eye contact, smile, be in charge, like realize that your posture matters, like standing up and in charge, using gestures that sort of convey, like dominance and not just like floundering hand motions. All that's really, really important. And part of this is sort of just faking it until you make it. Just like envision yourself as being a person in charge, even if you don't feel like it at all. But you just have to pretend that you are in charge. You have to act like you are in control. And all of this is an important and very powerful way of communicating confidence, sort of more than sometimes what you have to say. Because if someone like really acts in charge in a debate round, like a parent might just vote for them. And the real challenge is turning this fear of public speaking that we have into confidence. Like, how do we, like get over all of these things that sort of make us really nervous about public speaking, right? Like, we all have like our own inner critic that just like eats at us. We're like, oh, we're not good at speaking. That person probably knows more than me. I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm really scared. What if I mess up? And it's really, really important to sort of, turn that fear into something that is powerful, right? So like, think about the things that you are scared of, and think about all of those issues, and like, how do you sort of overcome them, right? Like, why are you scared of people judging you if you fail, right? Not really much of a sort of rational reason for why. And you have all this energy, and it's important to just turn that into something that you can, use in a positive manner. I would like to go on about this for a while, but obviously it's like a long subject on its own. So I'll just move on to sort of the final part, which is, I think this is probably more important. It's creating a sort of stage persona. And I think you wrote something at the top here about this, right? You wrote that it's developing a sense of self.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's really important because if you're just a robot, it's really going to be difficult for you to be confident because you're not sort of being yourself. And so when you are speaking, it's really important to develop a sense of self, like a stage persona. And it's not like putting on an act. Like you don't have to pretend to be someone that you're not necessarily, but you sort of need to think, what are your sort of best qualities as a speaker, right? Are you like really emotionally intelligent? Are you like really compassionate? Are you really cool? Are you really focused? Are you well, like what is your sort of thing that makes you good at speaking? And sort of what are those trademark features about yourself? Like what makes you different from everyone else? And to sort of be different, because if you're just a robot, who cares? Like you're just another one of those robots. But sort of developing a sense of self, a style, a method, something that distinguishes you from everyone else, really is important in nonverbals. Like portrayed, like live up to your strengths is really basically what I'm trying to say here. Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was talking about with like the professor, I mean, like it'll be different for different people, sort of like how they will be persuasive, how they'll present yourself. And it's important to find your own voice in that. For me, it was a loud, very sort of blustery person that used hand motions and put their fists on their hands and was like, this is so unbelievably important, vote for me. And yeah, that's what I did. But it'll be different for you, and it was certainly different from Lawrence, for Lawrence.
Right. I forget sort of what my style was. I think it might have just been like annoyingly cocky kid. I don't really actually know.
Annoyingly cocky kid.
But like, yeah. Like at first I was just trying to be as bland as possible. And then I was like, wait, I kind of need to develop a personality. Like I need to be myself in debate rounds. Like people need to be able to distinguish me from any of the other million debaters that exist.
Wow, there are a million debaters that exist. That's crazy.
I actually think there are only 14,000 LD debaters registered through the National Speech and Debate Organization.
It is just absolutely insane that you know that. Okay. All right. So
I think that's everything.
All those things are especially important. For me, confidence came from ignorance and arrogance.
Yeah, isn't it? There's like that weird paradox where it's like the more you know, the sort of more you realize you don't know, and so the less confident that you become.
Well, it's more like as a novice sometimes. And by the way, this is very not true for most people, but it was true for me that I was cocky as a novice. And then I found out how hard things were. Became less cocky, lost more as a result. But then later started to gain some confidence back, and then I was better than ever. So
yeah. Okay. So maybe it's not like a direct inverse relationship, but like there's like some strange relationship where you get too confident, like so you start off really confident because you don't know that much, and then you sort of lose it for a while because you sort of realize how little you know, and then you gain it all back once you sort of cross the threshold into a level of knowledge that actually qualifies you to be like considered intelligent.
Well, it's more just like for again, this does not apply to most people in my experience teaching novices, but for me it was like I had confidence because the bar I was setting for myself was way lower than it should have been. Then when I realized that the bar was higher, I didn't have confidence because I was under the bar. But then eventually I just got above the real bar, and then I became confident as a result. But fake it till you make it.
Yeah, I mean, like, it doesn't really matter how much real confidence that you have. Like, you just gotta fake it till you make it, which is kind of actually like a bad life lesson because like it does encourage people to just like say things in subject areas that they don't know anything about. But like for debate, it really only matters, like the point is to persuade people, which means getting a ballot. So like you have to fake it till you make it.
I'm gonna make one more quick comment about this, and then let's move on. The real reason why it's important to be confident, especially in front of a lot of judges, is that a lot of people, even the ones that are good judges, take confidence as a proxy for who wins, especially because, and we did talk about this in the adaptation episode, a lot of times judges do not know who wins because they don't have a technical understanding of the debate, but they can usually reverse engineer who wins on the basis of who was more confident. The person who is oozing, I lost, they're just going to be like, well, they're probably losing because they think they're losing, and maybe they know more than I do. And if both debaters seem in agreement who's winning, then a lot of the times the judges is going to respect that. And also remember that confidence in you can create lack of confidence in someone else, which can really have a really powerful effect. Okay, so
cool, I think that's everything. Perfect.
yes. So we've given you a lot of top-down understandings. We've answered a lot of the stuff that Marcus was talking about. In the next section, we're going to talk about some specific drills and practice that you all can do by yourself, or if you're a coach, Marcus, with your students in order to improve your persuasive ability when we come back. Now the fun stuff, the drills. What are some specific methods that you can use to improve your persuasion ability? Lawrence, you've written a kind of big picture thing for kind of in debate rounds, and I'd like to talk about that last. What I want to do is talk about something that you can do with various things you can do with your students outside of the context of debate rounds or debate tournaments that you can use to improve core skills. The key thing that I want you to understand about these things is that you don't need to be in a debate round to improve your speaking ability. In fact, the best way to improve your persuasive speaking is by focusing on targeted areas of improvement. So instead of just having a practice debate and be like, here are the 6 ways of being more persuasive, it's way better instead to focus on specific things. So you do a drill to focus on one very key component, isolated from all of the other components. When people do science experiments, they try and take one variable and isolate it from all the other ones and see if that changes anything. That's how scientists deduct cause and effect. And what you're doing is you want to keep everything else constant, and then you want to work on improving a core skill, and that will get you to where you need to be. So these are things that I teach a speech class, and these are things that I have done with my people. They're not involved in debate in order to become more persuasive at specific things, to speak better. So one of my favorite ones that I've constructed, and I'll do with you first. And Lawrence, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to pull up some of these that I've actually written, and I believe, I actually wrote some of these.
Well, I mean, truthfully, this part is just all you. Like, I don't know any of these things, so I'm going to be learning along with everyone else. So.
Well, I'm saying, Lawrence, why don't you let me know how persuaded you are by the things that I'm about to do. Okay, so one of the most important things about persuasion that you have to emphasize, Marcus, I'll speak to you directly, is that a lot of times you can be persuasion is related to as much, if not more, how you say something than when you say it. So one thing that I make my students do is I find just some really boring stuff, some just absolutely soul-crushingly boring paragraphs on the internet, and just make my students read them as persuasively as they possibly can. And I'll say, persuade me of this. And then I will give them something like the following. So I'm going to read one of these things in an uninteresting way. I actually had a lot of fun finding these. If you're working on doing this, trying to find some of the most boring paragraphs on the internet to make your students passionately read and do all the voice stuff we talked about earlier in terms of creating emphasis and slowing down and being fluent. So here is me persuasively reading to you parts of Brazil's visa application process.
Oh my God.
Your completed application must include your name as it appears in your passport, include your designated code number, which will be issued at the end of the online application process, include your signature as it appears in your passport, be submitted to the consulate within 90 days of completion, be signed inside the large box at the top right. When required, upload your passport style photo. You will not be able to finish the application without uploading a photo. Be printed and included in your completed Visa Central application kit. That was me persuasively reading literally some of the requirements for Brazil's visa application, just a bunch of bureaucratic nonsense. So one thing that I did with my students at camp was I had a paragraph. It was some random scientific study on cancer or something like that. And I just made people not cancer. It was enzymes. There's some random stuff about enzymes. And so I had people I had a competition where I was like, it is your job to read this as persuasively as you can, and the person who wins will like get some candy. So you can turn it into a competition if you would like. But the key thing for this drill especially is iteration. You have someone read it, then you say, here's what you should do. Now work on figuring that out. Now read it again. And it can be really fun finding some of this stuff. Like, for example, I have, a description of Baroquean architecture. I have Home Depot's site of how you prepare to install a washing machine in your home. Not even the installation, just how you prepare the installation. I have a bunch of different parts of a snail. I have a random crime report for the Emery Wheel. Shout out to the Emery Wheel for being super boring as usual. And everything related to that. So Lawrence, what do you think about this drill, and do you want me to read one of them to you?
I don't know how to feel about this, but like if you want to read it to me, I'm all ears.
So the one I actually have the one here about enzymes.
I've always wanted to hear about enzymes.
It's actually just completely incomprehensible. But okay, so here it is. A novel and highly selective electroanalytical sensing nanocomposite material is reported for the development of a glucose biosensor. Exfoliated graphite nanoplatelets were tested to enhance the sensing capability. The XGNP had a diameter of 1 micromole and a thickness of 10 nanometers on average. The glucose biosensing interface was prepared by casting glucose oxidase and XGNP in a Nafion water isopropyl alcohol solution with a high concentrated organic solvent. The resulting biosensors showed rapid response time within 5 seconds, limits of detection of 10 micromoles glucose, a linear detection range showing up to 6 micromoles, and high sensitivity of 14.47 micromoles alpha with an optimum glucose oxidase loading. The biosensors also showed good selectivity and long-term stability. I have absolutely no clue what I just read.
But it sounded good. I was zoned out, but at least it sounded good.
That's the thing. Sounding good doesn't require you, first of all, to really understand what you're saying, although obviously you should put emphasis on some of the important words. But really, the important words and emphasis you put on certain words and phrases, that can be, that can really do most of the work itself based on sentence structure. So I had no idea what I was reading, but I knew that they were English sentences, and I could emphasize words and parts in those sentences. So it sounded good, even though in the case of the thing I just read, it's not really possible unless you know a whole ton about science to know what I'm saying. So so I have found this to be really helpful for kids. It's cool if they can pick one. You might want to like assign them to them. It's helpful for you to do it. Sometimes you don't even want to give them a chance to read it first. You kind of have them go in cold the first time, and then just read it. Just some really, really boring stuff. And anyone can do this. Just find some really boring paragraphs on the internet, have your kids read them, or read them yourself, or have someone else find some stuff. If you're a student, maybe like pull out, one of your more boring textbooks and try to just really persuasively read your Algebra 2 textbook. It's just like this can be done with anything. And this drill can be done in front of anyone you want, including in front of like a parent or something like that. Just like say like, how do I sound? And it's, and then if they're like, you sound good. I had no idea what you said. Like that's a good sign. Okay. So, I call that the boring things voice drill. I haven't thought of like a cool name for it. Okay, so here is another drill that I sometimes think is good to do. This is a variation of a drill that you can do actually whatever level of debate that you're at. But one thing that I find can be a really useful drill for slowing down is what I call a molasses speech.
I assume that's just what you're doing now, unless
It was in fact exactly what I was doing.
unless you're like,
So
I don't know, having a like a medical like condition.
a medical emergency.
Yeah, like I mean, if that's the case, you should probably let me know right now.
Yeah, nope, nope, not yet, not yet, Lawrence. You won't get all my collection of Priceless Magic: The Gathering cards that I've willed to you. You'll just have to wait. So a molasses speech, as you probably just heard, is try and have someone either give a written speech, or even better, have you and someone else do a conversation where you have to leave like 1 second between every word that you say. So that's the important thing. And what that does is it forces you to slow down. People will not naturally slow down. The thing is, the first 20 times you tell someone to slow down, they just don't do it. And it's partially because they don't realize that slowing down is not a mental activity. Slowing down is something you need to force yourself to do. Knowing that you should slow down does not mean that you should slow down, which is why most people don't. So you have to really explicitly force yourself to slow down. And when you are slowing down in a debate speech, it will sound to you like you are way slower. Of course, you sound way faster to people on the outside who do not know, outside of your head, who do not know what you're going to say. Whereas you do know what you're going to say, and you've already thought about it, so it doesn't come across as being too fast when you say it. Molasses speech, and especially enforcing this on someone else, making them give a super slow speech or engage in a super slow conversation, can be really helpful in sort of having students exercise executive oversight, where they are using their brain and physically forcing themselves to slow down. And that can be really helpful. This is not a drill that you necessarily need to do a ton of times. One other thing, though, that molasses speech does, here's a variation that I actually do with my kids, which is called emphasis. That's where instead of slowing down a ton between words, you slow down between every syllable. You force yourself to say every syllable in what you're doing, which, by the way, is the thing that you should always do if you want to know how to pronounce stuff in your case. If you're practicing pronouncing your cases, you really want to savor each syllable. And the only way to do that is by going super slow, making sure you know where all the syllables are, and then collapsing that again into like a much longer, bigger speech. So putting, pauses between all of the syllables, doing those pauses can be good. Or you can do them between words, whatever works. But that can be important. And again, the specific skill here is forcing yourself to slow down. Have you ever done a drill that is a variation of this, Lawrence? I know that this isn't something that like people necessarily do super commonly, but it's just something that I found to be kind of good.
Well, I don't think I know basically any of these drills except for the next one you're about to mention. Because like I didn't really do drills like this. But I mean, the sentiment of sort of slowing down is in fact something that my coach forced me to do, just not in the context of a drill. Just usually like in the middle of a practice speech, she just start over.
Yeah.
Too fast.
Okay.
Like, all right, fair enough.
Okay, that's fair. The tough love approach, where instead of making someone do a drill, you just tell them that they fail over and over, and then hopefully they correct it.
I mean, apparently it works, so I can't really complain.
Yeah. I know. I'm saying like it works, but this is where if you want to specifically improve the skill in an isolated context, that's how you would do it. One problem that a lot of debaters have is pronunciation things, and especially with like how do you know how to say certain syllables, and sometimes people get tripped up, or people talk too fast. I find that tongue twisters can help with these. So getting some tongue twisters on the internet, forcing people to say those tongue twisters, not necessarily super fast, although you could, but just have them kind of like say the syllables a bunch of times, can really like free up parts of your mouth that maybe you like didn't know existed that you would have to use, because sometimes people will try and say stuff according to tongue twisters, and usually there are a bunch of them to whom for specific individuals doesn't work because the way that their mouth is working. So that can really help people with pronunciation specifically. Tongue twisters are good. So there are a couple of drills that are good also short term when you're at a debate tournament. So when you, a student, are at a debate tournament, doing tongue twisters between debates, if you decide that doing things between debates is wise, a la our last episode, then doing tongue twisters between debates can be helpful in sort of like freeing up your tongue and your mouth. The last thing I'll say about tongue twisters is that they're really fun to do in groups. Because everyone is just constantly messing up and saying stupid stuff. And usually, a lot of times if they're in groups, people will kind of like, there's a lot of laughing and sort of jovial behavior. It's not like someone being super, like type A being like, I'm going to learn how to say, how do I cram a clam into a clean cream can? Just
Wait,
like
did you just make that up right now?
that is a tongue twister that exists that I remember.
Oh, okay. I was about to say that's impressive.
Dude, I've done a lot of tongue twisters with my kids. Imagine an imaginary menagerie manager imagining an imaginary menagerie. I also just did that one from memory because I'm a boss. But you'll see that even and like some ones that people can do will like be super easy for them, but not for other people. So it gives the opportunities for them to be like, wow, you can't even do this one, like what a noob. So it's actually really fun to do in like the context of practice and whatever, and especially if you're looking for kind of like a low stress drill that will sort of help. But that can be good for team bonding. Definitely group tongue twisters like Kylan has found to be very fun. There are some that are like the bane of my existence. There's one about seek and sheeps, and that always just destroyed me. Because again, tongue twisters focus on certain sounds that are like difficult to say, like saying a bunch of sh sounds with minor variations after each other was like that one, and that one is particularly difficult for me. And then there's like cram, claim, can, and stuff like that. Forces people to like slur stuff together. So that helps focus on things. So have you done tongue twisters, Lawrence?
I did, but only I just like made kids do it. I never did it myself.
Wow. Do as Lawrence says, not as he does. Okay, so the next thing is less of a drill and more of kind of like a writing exercise that you can do with your students and with yourself. Try and find a really boring piece of description and rewrite it to make it interesting. Now, one thing that I did was, many of you have read The Stranger by Camus. Have you read that book, Lawrence?
Probably not. And if I did, it was just like a Spark Notes. So,
wow, what a noob!
I'm not gonna lie. Like the vast majority of high school reading assignments was the Spark Notes did. I do not recommend doing that. But
you legitimately missed out. The Stranger is great, and you should read it.
I don't read, so.
I mean, me neither, but The Stranger is great and you should read it, which is how you know you should read it. So The Stranger is kind of like, this isn't a spoiler. The book was written in like 1950 something, but like, the general, like you all should read it if you don't already have for your classes, but that book contains some sections that are legitimately very boring on purpose and kind of soul crushingly boring. So one thing that I did with my students is I made my students, I gave them a section of The Stranger and I said, rewrite this and make it interesting. And one of the things that we really did there is trying to help out with storytelling. You want to try and tell a story in debate rounds, which is not just using your voice and not just perceptual dominance, but the content of the things you're saying. How do you say persuasive things? What are sorts of things that are persuasive to people in a story? So I would sort of talk with people about it, and I would be like, make this interesting, and then kind of give them a whole bunch of things. In this case, this one section of Camus. Tell it as a good story with a point, and that can be good. This is a thing that you can maybe help students do to improve core skills, but obviously, and you students can maybe do this to improve core skills. But this is not a thing that like you would do at practice or anything like that, probably. because it might like take a long time. If you want to do it practice, what I did was I kind of had students all do it, and then they kind of just like rotated around. I gave them advice on how to fix it, and then we went around a second time, and those people kind of iterated on what they had done, did those things again, etc. This is definitely like one of the lesser important drills, but if you as a debater really need to work on your storytelling skills, because storytelling is of course a central component of winning at Lincoln Douglas debate, you need to, this is a drill that would very much benefit you.
Yeah, and I think we like talked about similar drills on the drills episode with Cameron a while back.
Yeah, probably. Okay, so the next one that I have. So one thing that's really important to realize about debating, especially in front of parents, is that although really this is true, I take back the in front of parents. This is true in front of every judge. When you are having a debate case, you have your let's say your 6-minute affirmative case. Really, you have what is about a 12-minute affirmative case, or an 18-minute affirmative case, or a 15-minute affirmative case. And that's because you need to be able to explain your case in slightly different ways, using different stories, using different metaphors, as a way of keeping what you're saying interesting throughout the debate. So people, when they hear you talk about your arguments, don't want to just hear you talk about your arguments with the exact same words and phrases you used before. They want to hear variation that makes things interesting and that they can use to sort of understand what you're saying. So one thing that I found is helpful for students to improve their explanatory ability is to take a paragraph, and this one could be in a debate case that they have, or in something that's not a debate case, and explain that with different adjectives, with different metaphors. You sort of alter a bunch of stuff. And the key is to do that multiple times, as many times as you can. Okay? So take the same thing, have them explain it 5 different ways, in ways that are good. Critique them on those ways. Then make them do it in different ways. Force them or yourself to play with different adjectives. Think like, does this sound better? Does this sound better? Maybe at the end, you take a look at the 5 different ways of writing something, and you say, this one is the better one. Or I'm going to take parts of this one, parts of this one, parts of this one. I liked it when I used this word, but maybe that didn't flow with this other thing. But maybe it flows with this other thing. So like the other one, this is kind of like a writing assignment, but it doesn't need to be. Because you can also do it in practice. You say, hey, here's your contention argument. Why don't you kind of like pre-flow that? Now I want you to explain it using a metaphor, using different adjectives. They do it. Then you say, okay, now I want you to use a different metaphor, different adjectives, different way of explanation, different sentence structure. Just make them redo it and constantly be thinking about how they want to do stuff. What is the most persuasive sounding? Which adjectives convey the best force? Which metaphors do that? This is designed to inspire creativity on the part of people, such that people can speak persuasively in multiple different ways. That way, when you get to the tournament, if someone asks you what your someone says in cross-examination, you have a million different ways to say it, and you know what the best one is. So this is also a thing that's helpful to do with somebody else, so they can give you sort of critique once all that's said and done. But important thing about that critique, the important thing is not that you say that's wrong or that's right. The important thing is just that you let people do it themselves a whole bunch of times. And then you say like, wow, that was a really cool thing that you did. I really like that. And kind of to encourage them, because the real important thing is for people to do it themselves and then have the capacity to do it in the future with rebuttal arguments as well as constructive arguments. So it's, the fact that they have the specific right explanation, or even if you can think of a persuasive way of saying their thing, that's not the important bit here. The important thing is to encourage them to do the thinking. Lawrence, what do you think about this, about that one? I'm always interested in hearing comments. Is there any way you would improve upon that?
I don't know. It sounds good to me. I can't see any glaringly obvious deficiencies in it. So
okay. So for the next sections, these 2 drills, these next 2 are really these ones are really sort of the meat and potatoes of of nonverbal communication drills. So one that I did with my group of kids, and I'm going to be, just to be completely transparent, it wasn't actually that good. So I'm going to suggest different ways of doing it. In fact, there's a specific way that there's a specific game that actors play. I think in terms of like acting training, in terms of improving it, and this is a variation of that. So I'm going to tell you the one that I did and why it didn't necessarily work very well, and then I'm going to suggest the alternate one. So this one is called this was a good idea, at least. It was called a lorem ipsum debate. So for those of you that don't know, lorem ipsums are fake Latin words that kind of auto-populate when you create text documents, or you can just find them on the internet. You get like lorem ipsum phrases. They are not English. They are not. They're not English, and they're not even words, even in any language. So, but what I wanted my students to do was where I gave them a paper and I said, I want you to have a debate with your opponent in front of the class, a short debate, back and forth conversation, and I want you to convince the class that you won. But the only thing that you can say is these phrases that don't mean anything, that are literally meaningless and not English. So the goal of that drill was in order to do that, you have to use your voice. You have to persuade the audience, use your hands, convey eye contact, be emphatic, even if you're not saying anything. But it's still a debate. The other person will try and say some stuff. And what I liked about the idea of this one was that it was kind of interpersonal. It required multiple people, but like debate and in cross-examination, there was a sort of back and forth response. You know, you are still trying to persuade other people of things and talk with them. And this assists in you doing that. The problem with the drill in the execution was that a lot of students kind of got really hung up in pronouncing a lot of the random lorem ipsum words. And a lot of them just like sort of as a function of that just kind of read off the paper, and it didn't work very well for the people that I was doing it, which is with my speech class. However, I'm going to tell a variation that I learned on a podcast was done as a form of acting coaching. So, and funnily enough, this was done as preparation for wrestlers to learn how to act in the ring. Lawrence, did you know that like wrestlers, like WWE, quote unquote professional wrestling, they take acting classes?
I mean, I'd believe it, given the entire thing is just one giant acting show.
Yeah. So the way that it works is the way that this game works. Here's the variation. So someone says, so someone will say a sentence to somebody else, and then for the rest of the conversation, however long it is, 5 minutes, you can only say the phrase that the very first person said. But you have to change your tones. Okay? So you still have to change your tones. Be emphatic. You're saying exactly the same sentence. But what you're doing is you're altering your voice to be persuasive, and you are using your hand motions, trying to convince the audience that you're right, even though you're all saying the same thing. And again, what this emphasizes is that it's not the content a lot of the time. It's the way that you present yourself, hold yourself. If you do this drill in front of an audience and the audience overwhelmingly votes for one person, then that's because that person had better abilities like this. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one, given that we're sort of running low on time. The next one is what I'll call a silent movie. And I found this somewhere on the internet when I was looking up drills to do for my speech class. This one is very similar to the lorem ipsum debate. Which is you have people have a debate, but they can't say anything. They still move their mouth as if they're saying something. They shouldn't mouth words. But what they should do is use their sort of mouth, look like they're talking, maybe make them say watermelon over and over, or 1, 2, 3, such that like people are moving their mouths in appropriate ways, and have them sort of have a debate where it's all about nonverbal cues. It's just about how you use your hands, how you use your eyes, how you stand, etc. So silent movie is what I call this one. This one is really fun to do in front of classes as well. Although for this one and the lorem ipsum debate, it's really important that you communicate with your students ahead of time that it's important that they be a respectful audience, even though you're doing like really humorous activities. Because the activities are legitimately humorous. But if you let just people laugh at their fellow classmates for looking stupid, then the drill will deteriorate. Okay, so I only have 2 more things that I want to mention as possible drills. One of them, and this one is obvious, is have them look at persuasive speeches, actual persuasive speeches throughout history. For example, Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, or George W. Bush's speech from on 9/11 to the nation, or JFK's inaugural address. Have them get the text of those speeches and practice delivering them. This one is very simple. Practice having them do all the things we talked about in terms of persuasive speaking for those things. So you have people read JFK's inaugural address. One thing that I find is helpful is also, this, by the way, is very, very useful for emphasis. What you want for emphasis is, what I found is really good for students is that you have them underline parts of the speech, parts of the words that they want to emphasize. When people first going in, they don't know how to emphasize certain things in the middle of a speech, so they just tend to read it straight up. So what you want people to do is you give them the speech and you're like, underline the words that you think are important, and then when you say the speech, emphasize those words. Say them a little more slowly, say them more forcefully. And that can be very, very helpful. Also because they learn what a good speech sounds like. They get that in their heads. Last thing. This is a variation on the first one. If you want to have people create tones, one thing, and there's a fabulous video on the internet, by the way, of Ian McKellen doing this that you can maybe show your students, where he says the first line of To the Merchant of Venice, which is a Shakespearean play. This is a very old video. And Ian McKellen says it in like 5 or 6 or 7 different ways. It's like, say this mournfully, say this in a lighthearted way, say this in a joking way. And then Ian McKellen says the first line of Merchant of Venice in tons of different ways. And you can take each of these different speeches and say them in ways that are sad, that are respectful, that are fearful, that are powerful, that are aggressive. You can practice saying speeches in different tones. And this helps students and debaters figure out how they would sound as sounding like these things. They can sort of test out various speaking personas, and they can also, test out how they like when they sound for certain things in kind of a safe environment outside of the context of an academic argument, because it's not the content, it's how you sound. This can be a good way of helping debaters simulate emotions and things like that. Okay, Lawrence, do you have any questions about any of those drills that we talked about? After that, I'm going to talk about one drill I don't like, and then we'll go to our conclusion.
No, I mean, I'll just quickly add the thing that I'd put at the top, but we moved to the bottom.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So it's just so I don't do any of these sort of drills, mostly because I wasn't aware of them. So now that I, have this knowledge, maybe I would. But for me, it's just watching good debaters and speakers and emulating them as much as possible. And I think all these drills that you mentioned will help. But if you don't know exactly what you're striving to be, I think you're not going to be as good as you want. So do these drills, but make sure to watch good debaters, both in rounds online and at tournaments, to sort of emulate the things that make them persuasive, right? Because the point of for example, molasses speech drill is to make you slow down and enunciate and really put emphasis on the words that you have deliberately chosen to convey the best possible message to your judges. But if you don't really know what that is, it's not really that effective. So I think it's really important that with all of these drills, we remember we have to have some sort of goal that we're working towards. And that goal is to sort of, we can easily envision that goal by looking at other people and trying to emulate them.
Exactly. Okay.
Right, so what's this drill you don't like here?
I don't like pen drills. I think they're awful for people. I think that they mess up their mouth. So for those of you that don't know, and then I'll let Lawrence go off about this. A pen drill is a drill that people do to try to improve their emphasis and to try and speak better. And what they do is they put a pen in their mouth and they just have students try and be clear through the pen, sort of be clear in spite of the pen. they never helped me. And in fact, I talked with someone, Araceli Beal, who hopefully we will have on the podcast. Excellent former debate coach. I miss her very much. Was so she like knew the biology of it, and she was like, that just messes up your mouth, which made perfect sense for me. I believe that it is harmful to debaters to do that, and I believe that if debaters think that it helps, it's a placebo effect, which is that you think it's helpful because you were just told that it was helpful, and therefore believe it regardless or not of whether it is actually true. I personally recommend doing things like emphasis drills, molasses speech, and tongue twisters way more than I recommend those things. Lawrence, pen drills.
Yeah, so like I don't do them mostly because I have a really bad gag reflex, so I'll just like start like every time I do a pen drill, which is a good reason to not do them for me. But also like I don't know, are they that useful? Like I feel like it hurts. Like I feel like it doesn't really do that much. Like if you just do regular emphasis drills, like you're gonna be fine. Like especially if you're not like planning on talking at 4 billion words a minute, like what is the point? So I don't know. Like I can see the value. I see why people do it, but like I don't really know. Like it seems like other drills are just a better use of your time.
Yeah, that's so true. So really, like, if you could take one thing, especially experienced debaters, please don't do pen drills. They actually just mess you up. Instead, do other things between and before debates, like overemphasis drill, molasses speech, tongue twisters, things like that. Okay, so that's all the persuasion drills we have, and when we come back, we will conclude with our mini debate. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode. We hope a special shout out to Marcus for sending us that email. If you have any requests for podcast topics, things that you would like us to talk about, please email us at theargumentclinicpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to get to your topic. Victory Briefs is a sponsor of our podcast. Again, Victory Briefs is one of the premier debate camps in the United States. For those of you that have never been to a debate camp, it really is a fantastic, once in, I don't want to say once in a lifetime because you could do it 4 times, but really it is just an incredible experience, and you all should do that, especially at Victory Briefs with lovely people like Lawrence and myself. Okay, so please leave us an iTunes review, like our Facebook page, and send us emails at theargumentclinicpodcast@gmail.com. Okay, Lawrence, mini debate. So the question that I have for you is about video games.
Alrighty.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You do those on occasion.
Rarely, but sure.
Actually, you know what? Video games, future topic. Lawrence, what's your favorite movie? I will offer a suggestion. Don't just like Google like best movies and be like, oh, it's the first one. Like you do. So my favorite movie is a movie called The Big Lebowski. I love that movie. It is a Coen Brothers movie. It's really, really funny. If I'm talking to you and you're especially young, do not watch this movie. It's very rude. But once you get very, very rated R, but once you get over, you should watch it. It has Jeff Bridges in it. The first time anyone watches it, everyone's like, what the heck just happened? And then the second time they watch it, it's riotously funny. And I'm not going to spoil it by saying why, but it's an incredibly funny movie that has a lot of really sort of a deep philosophical feel to it, both a sort of interesting cinematic nihilism, but also it's also extremely life affirming. It's absurdist. It's very funny. Jeff Bridges, John Goodman are both, and Steve Buscemi are just really, really funny in this movie. It's my favorite movie of all time. It's also one of the few movies that gets better the more you watch it. I've seen it 10 times. It plateaued at like the 9th time. And by plateaued, I mean it didn't get worse. It just was as good as it was the previous time. It kept getting better because I watched it. The more random things that I realized, the more comedy I picked up on. So that's my favorite movie, and I'll argue to the death that it's the best. What's your favorite movie, Lawrence?
So like I could just throw out sort of an obvious movie that everyone likes.
I mean,
but I don't know. For me, like it's really hard to pick a favorite. But I don't know. Like Star Wars Episode 5. It seems that was the first Star Wars movie that I watched. I watched them out of because I watched them out of order. And I think that was the sort of movie that got me into movies. Because prior to that point in time, I didn't really care that much for movies. For one thing, I was from an Asian household, and it's not like I got to watch that much TV. But that was sort of the movie that sort of prompted my interest in all things Star Wars, all things sci-fi, all things movie. And so for that reason, I think it sort of stands above all of the rest of the movies that, there's a lot of movies that are probably better than Star Wars. But for me, it's just that one. Also,
that movie is really good.
Yeah, I mean, and you told me not to Google this, but apparently it is 13th on the IMDb top-rated movies.
You Googled it.
I picked this movie first. I picked this movie first.
Come on.
In fairness. Okay, well.
That's fair. I mean, I will say that Star Wars Episode 4 was definitely what got me into the idea of movies. So I went straight from Thomas the Tank Engine to Star Wars because my mom went away for a weekend, and then my dad was like, "Oh, just take him to see Star Wars." And I was playing with Thomas the Tank Engine trains, and then all of a sudden I just became obsessed with Star Wars instantly. And my mom was so pissed at my dad. She was like, "What happened to my guy playing with trains? He just wants to talk about Darth Vader now." So I totally get where you're coming from. Star Wars 5 really is excellent movie, far more of a blockbuster. I still like the Big Lebowski better, but obviously they're super close.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough.
Have you seen the Big Lebowski?
I have not. I've only seen parts of it.
Dude, I am 100% gonna watch that movie with you at some point. Movie is
fair enough.
Amazing. I of course have already seen Star Wars Episode 5 a bazillion times.
Yeah,
okay. Well, Lawrence is signaling to me not so subtly that he has to go do a thing. So thank you all for listening to this episode 15 of the Argument Clinic podcast. And so I want you all to have an excellent rest of your day or night or whatever it is, and stay frosty.
This isn't an argument.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. It's just contradiction.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It is not.